And so originally we were talking about presenting something that relates to responsible use of artificial intelligence in mental health. I will touch upon that, but not in the way that was originally planned. And so I turned today's topic addressing biopsychosocial needs during collective trauma and grief between civil society, and I will focus on civil society, professionalism, regulators, and government. And during this presentation, I will share some artistic expressions that one can find, sometimes only in Hebrew, over the internet and otherwise, which I think depicts an interesting story of what some of us are going through over the past month or so. And I thought of giving a very short kind of introduction to what happened in Israel over the past year, because I think it is related in some way, and it didn't start with a horrific attack. So over the past year, there was this debate between two opposite sides, so to speak. One of them was very much opposing the suggested, some would call it judicial overhaul, or the judicial reform that was led or was promoted by the government. And some of the groups that were involved were those of the women, they call themselves Women Build an Alternative. And you could see the slaves kind of images kind of showing that where the government is going might be leading to harming women's rights and so on. And there was another group, the high-tech protests, talking about how if democracy is to be hurt, then high-tech could not thrive as it did before. And all these groups are very relevant to what's happening today, and that's why I'm starting here. There was the Army Reservists protest, or Brothers in Arms, and they, for instance, went to the ultra-Orthodox areas and opened a kind of a place to draft people to the army, which was basically a way of protest saying, you have to share the burden with us. So we could have this group of the more Orthodox, versus the more liberal in a way. There was the group of the academia protests. So there was fear that academia will be harmed and its ability to express itself freely and so on. And there was the mental health for democracy. There is no democracy, or there is no mental health without democracy. And all these groups had their ever-growing WhatsApp groups with some with thousands of people or even tens of thousands of people. So this was a really big civil, I wouldn't say uprising, but a very big civil organization that became very steady over 37 or 40 weeks. Every week there was a large demonstration and many, many other demonstrations around the country. And so this was one side of the debate, in a way saying that they're afraid that the current government might be leading us towards less democratic directions, with several legislations that were feared to be problematic to human rights and generally to the ethos of what some thought was the ethos of the country. And some of the claims were that what the government is leading for would kind of destabilize the checks and balances, would give the government too much power, would allow them to appoint non-suitable candidates to professional roles and other roles, and will erode the authority of the professionals. So you can say whatever you want, but the government would do whatever it pleases. So you can only consult, but they're going to do whatever they want. And that was kind of what people were talking about. And then there was the other side, which was, you know, in a way, the bigger side, one would assume, because that was the side of the majority of the coalition. So there was shown support of the overhaul, saying that it's only restoring the power to the people. Too much power was given to the professionals, to the clerks, as they called it, to the judges, and it should not be that way. They thought that anyway, the government represents the wishes of the majority, and the decision makers should be the ministers, and the professionals are just consulting. They also talked about, well, maybe you don't like some of the laws. That's the way it is, right? I mean, the government makes the laws, and if it's the majority, then it's okay. Obviously, I'm not giving you the whole story, but this was every week. People felt like they're fighting for their country in both sides. So instead of talking about dictatorship, they talked about dictatorship of the courts. So there was an interesting times. And at some point in time, about March that was, the Ministry of Defense was telling our Prime Minister, look, you have to pause the judicial overhaul because it's risking the safety of our country, because many of the soldiers, many of the pilots and others are saying we will not go into Army Reserve if you continue. We will not feel safe in international criminal proceedings. We cannot trust a government that doesn't have enough, let's say, checks and balances to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to. And Netanyahu fired the Minister of Defense when Gallant told him that. And tens of thousands of people immediately went to the streets. And this was a very exciting and frightening times. And a few days later, Netanyahu revoked his firing of the Minister of Defense. Very interesting what happened over this year. A few months later, they were going to have the first part of the judicial reform passed in the Knesset, and again, the Air Force people said more than 1,000 people signed a letter. Pilots, we're not going to go into Army Reserve, and that's the biggest or a very big chunk of the Air Force, which is based on people in reserve who are volunteering. So you can't force them to do that, right? And even though they said that, the first part actually passed. And, you know, this was very, very tense. But maybe if we look at this picture, it gives us a symbol or a sign to what's coming next. So these are people going down to the train towards probably Tel Aviv or something like that to demonstrate against the overhaul. And these are people going to another city to demonstrate for the overhaul. And you see them shaking hands, and they're both holding the same flag. And so, you know, remembering that we are brothers and sisters, although we hold different views. And so after a long time, that was, I think, very, very hard for many, with a lot of bad blood in a way. There was this holiday of Simchat Torah. So that means there's no demonstration in the evening because it's holiday. So we are taking a break of the demonstrations. And it's also Saturday. So it's a Saturday, it's a holiday. People have been or are going to celebrate with the Torah and so on. And some people have gone to a nature party. And then this happens. So I wake up, it was 6:30 in the morning, and I hear a siren. That was in Tel Aviv, me together with millions of others, because a lot of cities were attacked at the same time, and thousands of missiles and rockets were fired at Israel during that day. And I remember the first thing I was thinking about is, wow, this is exactly 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, which is also a war that began on a holiday on Saturday. Just to let you know, usually on a holiday and Saturdays, usually holidays, you have less people working in the military, for instance. So we reduce the number of people to the minimum required. So from a strategic point of view, that's also a smart move. But, you know, fool me once, it's on me. But fool me twice, it's on you maybe. But fool me twice, it's really on me. And so it started like that. But it seemed to have been really not just a rocket attack, but really thousands of terrorists infiltrated the southern border of Israel from the Gaza Strip. These are people in the Nova party. Thousands of them were celebrating until the morning, and you see the explosions there. And later, the terrorists arrive, and they have been massacring and slaughtering 1,400 people on one day. 260 of them from the party, many others in different villages and kibbutzim and so on, doing horrific things that day, taking over 240 people kidnapping 240 people. And I was trying to kind of map out the emotions or the reactions or the feelings, and it's just so many of them, and they're so confusing and so different from one another. And I was actually considering doing this kind of a shifting graph of what becomes bigger and smaller over time, and it just became too exhausting. But what I'm saying is that while immediately people were shocked and a lot of pain and so on, things have started to change over time for different people. Now, so I'm going to talk about some of those feelings and some of those emotions, some of those reactions, and we will then have some time to actually see how it all comes together to discussing what we do here, which relates to ethics, relate to forensic work and law and so on. So, I think one of the things that one would notice is that there's been a lot of trauma processing through art. And I'm just going to show you some examples. So this is the work of Zoya, and it's published online, and it's all open and public. So these are, depictions of the people in the party running away when the firing starts, and then they hear firing and they're not sure where to go, whether they should run towards the woods or somewhere else. Or this picture, which, kind of depicts not just the dancing and so on, or the babies, but also the blood in different body parts, including genitalia and so on, kind of alluding to the rapes and other horrific things that happened and transpired that day. And notice the oxymoron here, the Nova Party massacre. So it's a party, but it's a massacre. And the word party, just in Hebrew, when you say a press conference, in Hebrew we call it a press party, and it's, they couldn't say party anymore. There's like, well, like we need another term. How can you say party? Because it's such this word became so filled with connotations that are just hard. So these oxymorons or even dissonances are something that I'm going to touch upon more because there are a lot of dissonances that people felt and are still living through. So yeah, there were sexual assaults, there were rapes, there were mutilations, there were people murdered in front of their children, or parents killed in front of their, and so vice versa. People burned alive, horrible things. And I'm showing you these pictures because these are not the original footages, but rather how Zoya was trying to, I think, kind of, I don't know, digest and kind of dissociate herself from the events, but also express herself and kind of build a story or a narrative that she could actually live with. And when you read what people write to her, they're like, this is horrible. Thank you for allowing the truth to be seen. And I'm feeling like it's not just, she is not just doing it for herself, but people actually have a sense of processing the events through the art of others and so on. So it's cruelty and sadism and evil, and people were wondering, how could this be? I mean, why would people do that and so on? We know that they're terrorists, they don't love us, but why this overkill? Why this cruelty? Could it be that the use of some amphetamines led to that? And I would assume that you would tell me that amphetamines don't make a person so cruel, so you might become psychotic or whatever. So civilians were attacked in their houses. They needed to hide, they needed to wait for somebody to help them, and there was a sense of abandonment because people were counting on the army to be there, if not immediately, then maybe an hour later. And for many reasons that didn't happen for many, and they had to be locked in their shelters or other places for many hours. Some of them murdered in their shelters that were burned and infiltrated and so on. And so a lot of people also wrote poetry as well. I'm going to read just one try to translate that. It's called The Hours. And without getting an explanation how, as if they knew, since they were born, they were hiding in the closet and stopping their breathing and waiting silently, but nobody came. And among their fingers, like rosaries, they were holding the promise that became an indifferent ashes burning through their throats, and nobody came. And they were caressing the children with their hands filled with blood as they were melting. And all the angels of the world were gone, and darkness fell, black and darkness, and an hour passed by, and another hour, and another, and another, and another, and another, and nobody came. So, you know, this experience of having people waiting to be rescued. Let's talk about the reporters who were reporting live. This reporter lives in the South. He knows many of the people who were there, and he was reporting while he was texting and SMSing and getting messages from these people, and he was reporting to the people what's happening, but also he was trying to write back to the people that were counting on him, send help, we're waiting, what's happening? And he needed to either respond or not respond. And he's saying, some people who survived said, I saw that you're not responding, and I imagined that you don't want to lie to me, right? So just imagine, so he's reporting and he's living this. So you're in a double position. You're in a professional capacity, but you're a part of the story. And this goes to the reporters, this goes to the first responders, this goes to the clinicians, this goes to many, many of us. And that's very hard when you're a part of the story, but you're also in a professional capacity in it. And so Almog Boker, this reporter, Channel 13, so maybe a week and a half into the war, he's sharing, I returned a couple of days ago to therapy, psychological therapy. I thought that as long as the war is going on and I'm working, I don't really need it. Everything is okay. But every night, as darkness falls, I fall apart. And every night, it becomes harder. In the past nights, it's a nightmare. I fall asleep for an hour, and then I wake up from a dream. It's horrible, and I have this horrible anxiety attack. This nightmare became the reality of hundreds of my friends last Saturday. The stories I've heard get control over me. I wake up sweating, terrified. And he finishes and writes, seeking therapy has a it's been a life-saving decision for me. Don't be ashamed and seek help. You know, it's the private Facebook account, but it's been shared by many thousands and reposted and so on, because he's expressing something very personal, but it's also something that many people could relate to, and it's very important. Another of the reporters who was a fighter in the army in the past and so on. So he is, you know, during the first day, he would talk, some people would call him, and he's online talking to them, telling them, yes, help is on the way and so on. But in a way, he knows that he may be lying to them. It may not be true. And it was very interesting to see how the reporters are trying to not, not to say wrong things. I don't think there is a right thing to say. So crying and reporting might be kind of what was happening over those days. And let's talk first responders. So without going into details, the atrocities, the horrific massacre that was perpetrated on the first day of this war had included, not just in numbers, but also in the things that were done, things that even the very experienced forensic experts or people who are working as, for them, it's kind of a religious duty to collect the remainings of people, to bring them to burial. And this guy is the spokesperson for Zaka, who does that work. And he was finding it very hard to cope with what he had to see that day, what was done to people. And he's sharing that on the first day with the people, with the responders who arrived there a few days later. And, so he's talking about, so I saw a woman whose belly was open, right? A pregnant woman, people who were burnt alive, you see that they were burnt while they were alive, not even shot first. And he's talking about what he saw, and you could see the military commando guy just putting his hand on him. So in a way, it's like horrible scenes. And this guy, a few days later, he was hospitalized for a while. Just the pressure is tremendous. And there were others who were needing to notify families and so on. They also found themselves hospitalized to get physical support for different reactions to the stress and the very, very hard work that they were doing. And obviously, think about the army. People who serve in the army that likes to see itself as a good professional army that protects the country of Israel. And this horrific event that took everyone by surprise, and the response was slow, the response was not merely enough. And, the response, the results speak very loudly, because so many people killed in one day, so many civilians murdered, so many kidnapped, and so on. And just a few days ago, some of the IDF senior officials were saying to the residents that were evacuated from some of the villages that were attacked, something that I think reflects their horrible sense of guilt and shame. I don't know what to make of this, but I just wanted to bring it as it was. We hope to die in battle because we're ashamed that we have abandoned you. We are dying of shame anyway, so at least we shall die trying to protect you, as we should have, and restore your safety. We promise to win this war. Now, obviously, it's not the best. I think it's not the best adaptive approach for any military person, and I would not even see it as a suicidal ideation, but rather as a way to express how horrible they feel. But I think this sense of guilt is something that not only army people feel, but just, today, one of the patients that I met, okay, he is psychotic, but his psychosis also revolves around horrible feelings of guilt, because being kind of a messiah who dreamt about his role a few months ago, he could have prayed more and perhaps save so many of those who were murdered and so on. So, so this feeling of guilt is something that many people feel, not just those who are actually in charge of protection of the country and so on. And so I'm going to quote here my good friend and colleague, Yael Lab, was a clinical psychologist, and she is. We're doing a project together that I'm going to talk to you about soon. And she talks about institutional betrayal. And this concept of institutional betrayal is usually referred to when you talk about the wrongdoings perpetrated by an institution upon individuals that are dependent on that institution. So like the institution failed to prevent or respond supportively to a wrongdoing by an individual. And it was committed within the context of the institution. So in a way, she talks about how the fact that, yes, the army people took responsibility, the defense people, a lot of the senior officials in the defense field took responsibility. They said, this happened on my watch. We take responsibility. The one person that hasn't taken responsibility, at least not in a very clear way, is the Prime Minister, Netanyahu. And Dr. Lahav says that the fact that it's so important that he will take responsibility, it's important for our mental health. And she talks about that institutional betrayal is perceived as one of the factors that could exacerbate PTSD and trauma. So in a way, people have been traumatized, and they need this kind of a good parent that would tell them, I take responsibility, and now I'm here to correct, and so on. And so in a way, she refers to how maybe political or other reasons for not doing that are leading to a price that others are paying in mental well-being. So the fact that many of the victims were babies either kidnapped or killed, and even horrible things that I'm not going to picture for you. This is a wall painting in Tel Aviv. Some see that as reminding of some of the pictures you might find from the times of the Holocaust. So there are a lot of allusions to kind of traumatic history and re-traumatization of some. And this is in Be'eri, one of the communities that lost many of its people in this horrific attack. So it's, children's room, and and I just heard yesterday one of the psychologists visiting there saying that it is as if time froze in there, because until today, in many of those villages that were attacked, because the terrorists arrived with so much ammunition, there's still some unexploded ammunition there. And a lot of the things remain as they were, as if people either were murdered or fled, but and it looks like a, I don't know, ghost town or something like that. It's quite horrific, and kind of, so on the one hand, time froze there. On the other hand, we're more than a month later, and life starts to move on in the country. And a lot of those people are not there. So they are somewhere that they have been moved to, like hotels and other places. So they're displaced. They don't know what's going to happen in the future. So they're stuck between a frozen past and a future that they are not clear about how it's going to look in terms of work, in terms of whether or not they are willing to go back to this place where they were attacked like that, and so on, so yeah. And there were the children that were left orphans, and so we have at least 21 children that lost both their parents, or if they only lost one but the other one has been kidnapped. So again, so who takes care of them? What would be the legal way to approach this, and so on? And I have asked my very good friend from the Ministry of Justice, Danielle, who will refer to those issues in really a few minutes. I'll end to leave room for my friends to share some of the things with you. So yeah, there's a sense of mourning, not just sadness. And so somebody was writing, yeah, it's already November, but I cannot find myself, I cannot seem to be able to rise from the Shiva. Shiva is also 7 days of mourning, but it's also saying it's the 7th of October. So it's been 3 weeks, and I feel like I can't do anything, right? And yesterday was declared a kind of a civil day of mourning. So it wasn't the government that decided that. It was the civil society and the civil organizations. And it was a very impressive day with a lot of events around the country. Again, not the government taking responsibility. And this evening, we're going to see on Channel 1 kind of movie or depiction of something that they call "With No Government, the population rises up," or something like that. Not in the sense of just steps up or something like that. So yeah, and there were many people kidnapped as well, and obviously some are doing their artwork in the hopes of drawing attention to their needs, their medical needs, and other things, calling for their release. You know, there's a sense that life will never be again. And maybe people will say that a lot of times after trauma. It has been a very traumatic event. And I hear that quite a lot from many people. So this is one of the poems that I try to kind of maybe translate, right? So those who have survived, well, can you say survive? What does it mean to survive? If you've, you know, if your parents died when they shielded you with their own bodies, maybe you survived physically, but what is the mental toll for that, right? Or if you don't know whether, you know, your grandmother has been abducted or murdered, and until today, we still have a few that were not identified because of the horrific conditions of people being burned to crisp and so on. It was a very big challenge forensically to know what happened to some of them. So I think it's quite clear that we're facing something that could be, over time, be acknowledged as a collective trauma, and not just the numbers, but also the how things were looking. So, you know, so how do you get a psychologist for 9.3 million people, right? I'm asking for a country. That was the post. And yeah, so people do different things. So one of the things is people are painting those who are have been kidnapped. So the grandchildren, for instance. So here is a 9-year-old drawing his teacher who was kidnapped with her son. So this is a way to allow the children to process, to be a part, to do something. Children sending pictures to or things to the soldiers in the front, and then the soldiers are excited about it and find them out, seek them out, and there's like an intergenerational connection and so on. So things are very interesting today in this regard. Depicting the reporters as superheroes or as action figures. The story of Rachel that had 5 terrorists in her home, and to try to avoid being slaughtered, she gave them cookies and she talked to them, and she took the role of a mother in a way. And she managed to navigate for many hours during the negotiations until they were released. I mean, the 5 of them were let's say neutralized, and she and her husband was released. So she became this kind of a local hero, and actually President Biden met her and so on. There are writing workshops for processing and ventilating and so on that are online. There are many online opportunities for people to receive information about how to cope with trauma and so on. Now, the second part is very, very short, and I'll let my friends add some information. So, for instance, talking about human rights, women's rights, homosexual, and so on. So that was before 7th of October. But when one of the soldiers that were died on the first day had his fiance or his mate left behind, they were fighting to allow him to be acknowledged as a widower, so to get the same rights as a woman. It's the first time that this happened. And so in a way, after many months of the liberals being afraid of the overhaul and so on, things because of the traumatic event changed dramatically, and the tone is different as well. And yes, this is a couple, both were murdered right there. So it's a horrible, shattering life, shattered lives and dreams. But then both of them were drafted to the war, so they get married when they're in Army Reserve, and it's been celebrated. So we're celebrating life and victory of life. And so it's not just about grief and mourning, but we remind ourselves as a society that we also have love and life and new children born and so on. And yes, on the first day, the terrorists killed anyone in their way, including a dog. You could see the video. And then people show how their dogs are running to shelter, even if they're not home. And then the soldiers there, because they are there when the people are in hotels, they are helping to feed the cattle or to rescue the dogs. Or you can see pictures of soldiers on vacation and their dogs. So I'm just showing animals here, but it's interesting how animals, and when I go to the shelter, a lot of times either the cat or the dogs or the neighbors come, and when you pet them, you feel like they're petting you back. And it's quite interesting to see that. So there's a big sense of solidarity. This is soldiers that wanted to keep alive the plants in someone's water plant greenhouse. So they say, I'm sorry for breaking in, but we really wanted to water everything, right? And this is the sense of solidarity. Or 300,000 Israelis returning after the war began to be here to support, to fight, or to do whatever is needed. So yeah, so our numbers have grown by 3% because of those people returning, right? The average donation per person doubled. Yeah, more than 60% of the adult population contributed. So there's a sense of doing. It's not just sitting there and crying and feeling sad, right? There are several things that were done, and I hope if Zohar is here, can you share with us just a bit about what was the civil activities in the first days? Are you here, Zohar?
Yes, I'm here. I will do my best because my child is playing here.
Yeah, so just say Zohar is a colleague, and he is an educational psychologist and quite a remarkable person. And I would like for you to share about your projects or others as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm also a senior lecturer at the academic college in the north of Israel. And after 3 days after the attack, our college donates the dorms for refugees, and then we just thought to try to give them mental support. Many people came from Sderot, Ashkelon, Ofakim, from villages next to the border and small towns. So without any governmental support, we few staff members from the Department for Psychology, we decided we open a clinic. We recruit 30 psychologists, expert with knowledge in trauma, and start to go door